So we're now going to open up the floor to any questions. And also a reminder, please, if you're joining us virtually, if you can refresh your browser if you're not seeing the chat box and type your questions in, please. Thank you. There is a roving mic that will be shared with you if you have a question. Thank you. No questions so far. Do I have to do like a Gerard and start asking some questions? Yes, we have a hand up. And sorry, there's no ways I'm going to remember everybody's name, so if you could give your name at the start of your question, that'll be great for the minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. It's Lindy Bennick from Hortgrow. I'm going to make a few comments more than a question, since no one else has come up, and I know that Paul will be talking later, and Kobus, so some of those things will come out in it. We've heard a lot, and thanks to CropLife for organizing this conference, from the opening speaker up until the last speaker, about the impact that the EU Green Deal is going to have on South Africa. I just want to make a few comments. I mean, we all know, we've been watching the space. The EU Green Deal started around 2019, where they started talking EU Green Deal and the farm to fork issue. The issue of mirror clauses is something that's becoming more recently, and if you really look into it, there's nothing out there that's been taken forward by the EU on an engagement with its trading partners. There's still a lot of engagement within the EU on whether it should go forward or not. Yes, on the antibiotic issue, it's gone forward, and yes, they're now talking about the impact on future on import tolerances. Just to say a few things, we know the EU Green Deal is there, but we've already had the impact of loss of chemicals since way back then, when the EU took the approach of doing from 396 to 1107 of taking hazard-based approach. And we've had an ongoing loss of chemicals in that time, with most of those chemicals dropping to LOD levels. Yes, in some cases there are import tolerances, but not all. However, we still, in many cases, can use those products and export at below LOD levels. So that's still very valuable for us. The other thing that I seem to feel at the moment is everyone talks about the impact of the EU Green Deal. I just want to put another thing on the table. It's already a very unfair playing field, because imports coming into South Africa, EU imports, can meet EU Codex or SAMRLs. And exports from South Africa must meet already the stringent reduced EU MRLs. So there's a lot. If one is talking mirror clauses and the whole issue of reciprocity, then we should be formulating an SA position and saying, we need to look at this definitely closer and say, if this is going to be imposed on us, what must we look at to make sure that there's a level playing field? So I'm just making those comments because if you take, for instance, thiamethoxam, we already on apples have an SAMRL of 0.02, which does not allow us to use it at 0.3, which is the EU MRL. If it drops to 0.01, we can meet that requirement. So there are other issues we need to look at and not just focus on what the EU is pushing. We need to be pushing back and saying what position must we have and how do we take those points forward.
Thank you, Lindy, and it's a great opportunity for us to reinforce why we're all sitting here today. Industry for sure goes back to regulators and trade partners around the world and highlights where we see there are concerns. However, you'll see that there's a lot of grower associations represented today. That is the voice of the farmer that we need. You heard it in the introduction with Samira, is collectively we need to take our concerns up the ladder, exactly as you say, Lindy. We need to have the African Union aware of our concerns. We need the EU to hear about our concerns. They need to understand that policies that are wonderful for them can have unintended consequences for our local farmers. Yes, a boer kan maak 'n plan, and some of our larger farmers can change and bop and weave and be flexible. But we also need to remember our emerging farmers in this country might not have that flexibility to change. So yes, we know that it's been coming. We know there's been flexibility. We also need to remember we're heading towards a bit of a perfect storm. We could lose a lot more molecules coming up. We could lose a lot more import tolerances. without replacement products coming in. Let's not forget that. And let's not also forget good agricultural practice and resistance management. It's easy to say, yeah, we've still got a few products for that pest crop combination, but if you've only got 2 of them and they're the same mode of action, where are we going to be in terms of resistance management? So we need to protect the toolbox of our local producers, and we need to raise the awareness and have the collective voice from all of us here today that are going to get our voice heard up the line. I'm very pleased to say that on the RSVPs we got, there is a great contingent of people from DTRC, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. So maybe some of them might have some questions raised in the chat for us just now. But we have included all role players so that our voice and the concerns of our farmers can be heard. Thank you, Lindy. We've got a question right in the back, please.
The Chairman, yes, I would like to just to make a comment. Yes, organic farming in South Africa is how can you say, a great word in South Africa, but also a challenge in South Africa. If you look at the soil qualities and the soil fertility in South Africa, compared to the rest of the countries, especially if you compare it to African countries, where you're sitting with percentage of carbon above 2 to 3, 4%, compared to South Africa, mostly of the soil quality or fertility is lesser than 1%, even lesser than 0.5%. So if you take that in consideration with the weather circumstances and also the water quality and the water scarcity, then South Africa stands in front of a huge challenge to be part of this Green Deal. And I think, personally, I think we have to take hands and see how we can manage this challenge in South Africa, because we had actually more challenges than other countries to make this dream come true around about this Green Deal. So organic farming in South Africa coming from long ago, but the farmers who want to change their mindset to become more organic is to take in consideration the yield outcome and also the food prices. So from international point of view, I think on the financial side or subsidized according to what the benefits of other countries had, according to South Africa, we don't have that kind of benefits. I think it will be a quite a challenging task for us in South Africa, together with CropLife.
Good. Well, thank you for those comments. And I'll have a similar reply to what I gave to Lindy, is exactly why we're here. Our colleagues at DTRC, our colleagues in CropLife Africa, Middle East, to engage with the European Union, even direct engagement ourselves with the EU. These are the messages that need to get up there and give examples of where the noble targets are more than likely not going to be attainable by us in South Africa and not going to be applicable to many of our agricultural situations. So thank you for sharing. And of course, the entire team is here. We will be engaging with people after this event, not just with anyone who makes comments, but anybody who would like to give insight afterwards. Please don't be shy. We can include comments, we can take good suggestions as to how we engage with trading partners and other regulators. Do we have anybody else? I've got nothing coming in on the live chat. No questions that side. Great. Tracy, I'm going to come to you. I very much liked your slide saying that there are opportunities if we can comply down the line with the new regulations. Do you have any suggestions for us as to how we can collectively, as all the role players, make sure that we do comply so that we do take advantage of those opportunities that this is going to bring us?
Well, yeah, I think there's many people in this room that's better placed than myself to answer that. Obviously, it's on the one end there's the ability to comply, and then on the other end there's still being competitive. So I mean, I think apart from what you're already doing here, I think a combined discussion, a combined effort across all industries, and not even just horticulture, all industries in South African agriculture, to get things like the Registrar's Office operating faster, to get new replacement products. Obviously, our farmers have to manage the pests. They have a challenge there, so whatever we can enable them with to do that within what the regulations will allow is ultimately what one is aiming for.
Great, thank you. Wibke, are you with us?
Yes, hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I have a question for you, Wibke. You've made it very clear that the CropLife position on environmental considerations being used when setting MRLs is, in our opinion, not correct. How has the European Union responded to that position to date? Has it been any positive feedback? Do they understand the position that environmental considerations take place during the evaluation of the active ingredient dossier or the formulated product, or are they wanting to continue along that avenue?
So the European Union, to our knowledge, will respond to all the member states that have submitted comments in the TBT notification. I don't know whether those comments will be made public or not, probably not, but maybe we hear them through the governments. In public fora, they continue to state that they will move ahead with the implementation of this policy because according to their analysis, it is legal and it is needed. But they have, so this week there was the Codex Alimentarius Commission meeting where the European Union also brought up their approach and want to include also environmental factors in the consideration for Codex. But member states opposed that the environmental factors are part of the Codex mandate. The Codex mandate is clearly on food safety and to facilitate fair trade. And therefore, it was this time they were not successful in introducing this into Codex in the discussion. So they will move ahead. They have a lot of pressure from their farmers in Europe. The farmers are losing tools in Europe. The regulation 1107, as one of the people from the audience have already mentioned, it's very strict and there have been many active ingredients being lost. So the farmers are losing tools and other farmers outside the European Union still have access to those tools. So the European Union clearly uses this kind of policy to establish a level playing field for their farmers in Europe. And I think this needs to be kept in mind when engaging in this topic with the European Union. So it's a competitive angle in this policy. It's not only the food environmental safety and food safety discussion that is center here. And therefore, I think it's very important that you raise it with the European Union and explain how you farm, because the Brussels bubble is very special, let's say. They have no idea how farming works. Maybe not a good idea how it works in the European Union, but definitely not a good idea how it works outside in the European Union. So therefore, I can only encourage you to explain the pressure, the work that you do in South Africa, how you farm, what it means to be sustainable, the tools that you use them responsibly, and these to explain and make that case and illustrate that to stakeholders in Brussels.
Thank you, Wibke. I think the message is clear, and one of the key reasons we're here today is to take that message up the ladder. We have a question in the room, please.
Thanks. Henny Groenewald from Biosafety South Africa. We've heard a lot about the chemicals, and you discussed a little bit about Act 36, but I think we should not forget about the genetic-based solutions that are out there as well, both on the side of, the possibility of reducing actually some of these things that we're discussing in terms of chemical use, but then also the actual sustainability things that we discussed that are the aims of the Green Deal. So my question related to that then is if there's any reference in any of those documents to the use of genetics, and specifically something like genome editing, and then related to that, I mean, in my experience, there's a lot of agreement and discussion. We agree on the potential solutions of these things. But the one thing that's lacking in South Africa is the urgency of addressing these things, especially at the policy level. So I would love to see a little bit more urgency in getting, and be proactive around these things. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie. I think, Chantal and I would be sharing your sentiment of some urgency around decisions on genome editing. I'm going to ask Prof. Matthews. Are you with us, Prof?
Indeed I am. I've been following the discussion and it's extremely interesting.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us and for your presentation earlier. So I hope you heard that question. It's all about, is there mention or an effort in the EU Green Deal to promote GMO crops or biotech, let's use the correct terminology, more aggressively?
A matter which is very live in the discussion at the present time. I think you'll be aware that there was a decision of the European Court of Justice some years ago which determined that the regulation of so-called new breeding technologies should fall under the extremely strict regulation of genetically modified organisms. The Commission has agreed to take this up and we are expecting it to come forward with a proposal that would suggest a more lenient regulatory regime for these new breeding technologies. But that hasn't yet come, so it's part of what we are expecting in the legislative program, perhaps over the next 12 months or so.
And while we have you, Prof, you outlined in your presentation quite an extensive list of parallel legislation that is coming along with the EU Green Deal. You've also heard from Wibke encouraging us to go back to Brussels with our argumentation as to why we could have some negative impacts on our farmers locally. Is there still a chance to impact some of that pending parallel legislation? Or has that ship sailed?
I would think that the European Union is very open to dialogue. I have to say, of course, that I am an outsider in terms of the policy process, so I'm obviously not here speaking on behalf of the European Commission or policymakers. But I think they are aware of the need to try to bring other trading countries with them to the extent possible. There is, I think Vibeke was quite right to highlight, there is this competitive angle, which is an important driver of the policy debate within the European Union, where European farmers have argued that they are not allowed to use particular active substances which their competitors outside the European Union have access to. So that competitive part is important. But I think there is also a genuine concern that we need to move more urgently and faster to address some of these global environmental problems. And obviously, in the case of the two substances we've been talking about, the decline in pollinators is a worldwide phenomenon. So to the extent that you and South Africans can say that you are aware and addressing this issue, that you have your own policies in place, my understanding is that there is still that opportunity to present that evidence and to make an argument for exemption, if you like, from the very strict rules. I've said lowering MRLs and import tolerances to zero. That was, of course, a shorthand for the LOQ, but basically there is, I think, still a door open there to make the case that you have policies in place to address these issues. So the MRL is not the appropriate instrument for you. But again, that does require collecting that data and presenting that case. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Prof, which is fully aligned with Wibke's recommendation and why we're all sitting here in this room today is to start preparing ourselves to collect that data. Do we have any other questions in the room? Lindy, let's get the microphone so the virtual
Sorry.
people can hear us.
I'm
Thanks.
just going to add to my comment, but coming back to the comment you posed to Vipka and her related comment. So at the moment, we're talking mirror clauses, but we need to understand what we mean by that. If we are saying that only products used in the EU, authorized in the EU, can be used, then the EU also needs to consider your comment about we have many products, new chemistries we won't have in South Africa because we haven't got those registered yet. So by implication, we are saying that if it's reciprocity and if you impose the same requirements, they cannot use products that they may have to use when they are exporting. So I think the whole thing needs to be really one gets the feeling the EU is pushing their agenda. They're not really taking into consideration. I think there are players in EU that are cautious and aware of it. But there's other issues that need to, and what it highlights to me, especially in preparing for this conference and some of the panel questions, we really direly need an SA position. And we need to understand what issues have already been raised at government levels by our government colleagues and counterparts that are in such discussions. And we need to have at least an initial attempt for an SA position. And underpinning that, we need to have a consultative advisory forum or platform involving the government parties involved, involving industry, and I don't only mean producers, I mean ag chem industry, and other relevant stakeholders that need to contribute to that position. Once we have that, we can then start seeing how we can influence our African counterparts or SADC or BRICS counterparts.
Absolutely, Lindy, and again, that's why we're all here today. This is the first step in, we don't want to own the process as CropLife, but we see it's important. We've got the experts all together. We can be the facilitator. So we see ourselves as the facilitator to establish that, sorry for using the word baseline, but we need that basic position, and then we can see the areas that need to be addressed, highlighted to people who are making these policy decisions. Fully aligned, that's why we're all here today. Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Do we have Samira with us? No, Samira's not with us. Okay. I just wanted to ask Samira to highlight something she said in her introduction. This is going to be one of more such interactions and activities with role players throughout the continent. So you heard Samira talking about CropLife Africa Middle East's efforts. So these efforts will be duplicated in other countries who are also exporting into the European Union. So this is just the start of quite a big strategy of CropLife on the African continent to make sure the voices of the African farmers are heard and policies and decisions taken in other parts of the world are not having too much of a negative impact on us. So if you do have interests in other African countries and you want to be part of those future discussions, please get hold of somebody on the CropLife South Africa team, or we have Evelyn and Les from CropLife Africa Middle East with us, so reach out to us during the breaks or afterwards, please. Well, if there are no further questions on the floor, I'm seeing nothing coming in from the live chats. I don't know if you're seeing something different at the back. No live chats. So thank you for your attention. I believe we've set the stage quite nicely as to why we're all here. And then we're going to dive into a few other things which are unique to South Africa perhaps, but also some other unintended consequences that haven't been discussed to date.